Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Eldred, and I'm with the Center for Best Practices. Thank you for joining us today for the After School Meals, a Win-Win-Win for Schools webinar. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, attendees are in listen-only mode, and we will be recording this webinar today. We will take questions at the end of the webinar. Please use the question box for your questions, and we will read them out loud or respond to them individually. An evaluation link will be sent immediately following the webinar. For those of you today who are attending to receive continuing education credit, a CEU certificate will be sent to you after evaluation completion. The webinar recording and resource links will be sent later this week. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague Carolyn Waite to start the webinar.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Again, this is Carolyn Waite, and I'm a Senior Program Manager in the No Kid Hungry Center for Best Practices. My focus area is the Child and Adult Care Food Program, At-Risk After School Meals Program. And prior to joining Share Our Strength No Kid Hungry campaign about 1.5 years ago, I worked for a state agency on the Child and Adult Care Food Program, so I'm very familiar with this program, and I am very excited to talk to you about that today. So just to quickly go over what our learning objectives are, we hope by the end of this webinar you'll be able to summarize the benefits of offering after-school meals for families and students, schools and enrichment programs, and for school food service departments. We hope you'll also be able to assess exactly where and how CACFP At-Risk After School Meals program can work for your district, and we hope you'll be able to identify at least 3 specific strategies to effectively implement and or increase participation in the CACFP At-Risk After School Meals program. And so along with that, just our agenda for today is to just go over why after-school meals are a win-win-win, give a brief overview of the program and how it works, then talk a little bit more about how you can implement that in your school, then go over innovative approaches and best practices that can really make it an effective program and reach as many kids as possible. And then we're going to have a guest speaker, Carolyn Thomas from Michigan, who's worked with many schools that have implemented this program, so she has some great insights from on the ground. And then we'll just quickly go over some additional resources that we have for you, and as Stephanie said, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But please, as you think of questions throughout the webinar, you can feel free to write those into the chat box and send them along. And again, we'll address those at the end of the webinar. So to start, why are after-school meals this win-win-win? Well, we spent a lot of time researching that question, and we partnered with the School Nutrition Foundation to really learn more from successful school nutrition directors. And they really showed us how this program can work for students, for schools, and for their school nutrition departments. So we'll again send you a link to this resource after the webinar, but a lot of the insights today come from this report and come from interviews with school nutrition directors. So part of the reason that the program is a win for students is because so many sadly face hunger. It's about 1 in 5 children in the United States lives in a food insecure household, so they struggle with having adequate healthy food at all times. And then just to learn a little bit more about what this means for children and families, especially as it relates to the after-school hours, we did a survey in 2013 to talk with low-income parents about their experience, and we found that the vast majority of kids are eating something after school. So we know sometimes we deal with perceptions that providing an after-school meal is too much food and it's going to contribute to obesity because it's something kids wouldn't get otherwise. But we know kids are, by and large, eating something after school. They're hungry. And for low-income families still, a lot of that food is coming from home and parents are purchasing it. And they say that they're spending a median of $400 per year providing that food after school. And the average is actually quite a bit higher, around $700. So some families are actually spending quite a bit more. Which may not sound like a lot, but again, for a low-income family with an already stretched budget, that's a significant expense. And so along with that, almost 2/3, 59%, said that it was financially difficult for them to provide that food for their children to eat after school. And perhaps even more shocking was our finding that a full quarter of those low-income parents we surveyed worried that their kids weren't even getting enough to eat between lunch at school and breakfast the following day. So those are really the kids that we know need to be reached with a healthy meal or snack after school. And so again, just more generally, so for students, an after-school meal can really help them if they aren't going to have a healthy dinner waiting at home. And then also just for those students who have a lot of activities going on after school and they're going to be there for a long time, it's very helpful and it can help to improve their performance and focus in those activities. For parents, they don't have to worry that their kids are going to be hungry or eating unhealthy snacks as an alternative. And then for the after-school programs that you may work with, we've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence of just increased attendance and increased interest in the after-school programming as a result of there being a meal available. And they also see improved behavior and less fighting. And then for your school nutrition department, there are so many benefits, everything from staff getting more hours, if possible, or new staff members, more recognition for the school nutrition department, extra resources that can potentially be used for equipment upgrades, and then just building better relationships with the students. And so to kind of exemplify that, we have some quotes from school nutrition directors. So some of these are featured in the After School Meals, a Win-Win-Win guide that we have. So this one just talking about that really tangible benefit of less fighting and seeing that difference. This quote talking about how, again, more kids are interested in staying for after-school programming and tutoring, and just the benefits that that has for the school, both for the programming, for the sports team, and for their overall academic performance. And then this last one, showing how those relationships can really help the school nutrition department build better relationships and lead to increased participation at lunch. So I thought this one was interesting, that the kids really got to know the cafeteria manager, and that's what made them want to come in for lunch because of that. And so as of school year 15-16, for every 100 free and reduced price lunches served, there were about 4.5 after-school meals served. So really a drop in the bucket compared to that need that we saw of 25% of parents worrying that their kids didn't have enough to eat after school. So there has been huge growth in the program that is really exciting, and I want to highlight that between school year 15-16 or 14-15 and school year 15-16, there was a 30% growth in after-school meals, which is wonderful. But again, that rose from 3.5 after-school meals for every 100 free and reduced price lunches to just 4.5. So again, there's been huge growth, but there is a lot of room to go. And so I just want to have a housekeeping note here that attendees are muted, but if you're joining by phone, we will need you to mute yourself so that other attendees won't hear any background noise. So please, if you're on your phone, if you could take a moment to just mute yourself. Thank you. All right, and so now we're going to jump into that overview of how the program works. So I just want to place after-school meals within the context of all of the child nutrition programs. So like the other programs, they're authorized by Congress as part of child nutrition reauthorization. They're administered at the federal level by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Nutrition Service specifically. And then in each state throughout the country, there's a different agency that is responsible for overseeing that program. In many states, you'll be dealing with the same agency that oversees the National School Lunch Program, although in some states it is different. So you see there CFP highlighted, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, and that's kind of the umbrella program that encompasses the After-School Meals program. And again, just because there are a lot of different names and a lot of different acronyms floating out there, I also wanted to just kind of highlight all of the different programs that are out there for those after-school hours. So as many of you may already be familiar with, under the National School Lunch Program, you have the area-eligible snack program option, as well as the after-school snack program, which is offering free, reduced, or paid snacks to children based on their household income eligibility. But then under the Child and Adult Care Food Program, you have the at-risk after-school meal program, and so that is what allows you to get a reimbursement for that full meal or a supper after school, since that's not possible through the Area Eligible Snack Program. And then CACFP also has the Outside School Hours Care Center option, which we won't really go into, but it is kind of the corollary to after-school snacks in NSLP. So the basic requirements for the Child and Adult Care Food Program, After-School Meals Program, is that you have to meet applicable licensing or health and safety standards, but the great part about this for schools is that that requirement is waived. So all of the cafeteria inspections and other approvals that you have to get to be in the National School Lunch Program counts for after-school meals, so you are good to go. If you do opt to work with any community sites, though, that is something to be aware of. The next big one is that you have to be located within the attendance zone of a school where at least half of the children are eligible for free or reduced price meals. So the school itself that's serving as the site or program location doesn't necessarily have to meet that threshold as long as it's within the attendance zone of another eligible school. And then if you have any schools that are taking advantage of the community eligibility provision, you just have to take that identified student percentage or that direct cert number and multiply it by 1.6 and just have to see if that's 50% or higher. But unlike CEP, you can't use any school groupings or things like that, so you do have to look at the individual school's ISP in order to determine eligibility. And then that last one is that your program site has to provide regularly scheduled educational or enrichment activities in a supervised setting. So different states have some slightly different interpretations of what that means exactly, but USDA has been pretty clear that they take a very broad interpretation of what that means. So generally, as long as there's some kind of activity from enrichment, tutoring, different clubs, things like that, that all counts. And then for the kids in the after-school meals program, similar to the summer meals program, if you'd be familiar with that, it is open to all kids who are 18 or under as of the beginning of the school year. And you can serve a variety of ages. You don't necessarily have to serve all children at all ages, but if you want to open up your program to everyone, you are welcome to do so and serve everyone 18 or under. And there is no enrollment or eligibility documentation. So again, they don't even necessarily have to be students at your school. They don't have to be formally enrolled in your school's aftercare program or anything like that. And again, because of the program being the at-risk after-school meals program, all of these meals are reimbursed at that free rate without any need for household eligibility information. And along with that, all meals are served free of charge. And each kid can receive up to 1 meal and 1 snack per day. So on school days, since the meals have to be served after school, that can be a supper and or a snack on a school day. But you can also operate on weekends, holidays, breaks, or other school closures throughout the year. And in that case, you could serve any meal, like lunch or breakfast, along with the snack. So talking about those meals, to go over those basics. So the CACFP meal pattern is our minimum standards for meal items and portions. So unlike the NSLP meal patterns, there are no like calorie or other nutrient limits or requirements. It's just the component groups and minimum portion sizes. For schools and school-sponsored sites, you can choose to follow either the NSLP or CACFP meal pattern, whichever you prefer or find easiest. And then just to note that there will be a new CACFP meal pattern taking effect on October 1st, 2017. So it will be fairly similar, and again, there won't be any calorie limits or other nutrient standards. But fruit and vegetable will become separate components. There will be a requirement for a whole grain rich item once daily. There will be a limit on juice to once daily, no on-site deep frying, and limits on sugar. That's really the only nutrient standard. Limits on sugar and yogurt, breakfast cereal, and flavored milk. But as school nutrition directors, these should all come pretty easy. But just to give you a quick idea of what the meal pattern looks like now, this is the meal pattern for lunch or supper. And for those of you working with middle school and high schools that have kids older than 12, you basically just follow that meal pattern for ages 6 to 12 and meet the minimum portion size. And you are welcome to serve more than that if you would like. In fact, it is encouraged if you're serving hungry teenagers, but you just have to meet that minimum. And I also just wanted to talk about super snacks for a moment while we're talking about the meal pattern, since we talk about super snacks fairly often around here. So super snacks are, in fact, suppers or meals. They meet all of the meal pattern requirements for a supper. And typically they include the minimum required portion for some or all components. So it's a small meal. And typically it's all cold and more snack-like items, so things like nuts and cheese sticks or yogurt for those meat or meat alternate components, you know, bell pepper strips and carrot sticks, apple slices, things like that. So things that do seem a little bit more snack-like or kind of a snack box type thing. And we found that they can be a good fit for programs that don't have the capacity for hot meals. So it can just help with having more accurate branding and managing expectations for students. So a lot of times when you think supper, you think meatloaf and mashed potatoes. But then if you walk in and you get a snack box with hummus and whole grain pita chips, you might be a little confused. So a super snack can kind of help with that perception. It can also be great for small children with small appetites, or for older children going to sports practice after a meal. I'm sure football practice on a hot day after a meatloaf and mashed potatoes would be less than pleasant. And it can also be good if you're working in communities that think a supper might be too much food, again, because of those obesity and overeating concerns, or if they think it takes away from an evening meal at home. So again, going back to those surveys, we know not all kids are getting meals at home. We know that kids are staying at school for long hours and do need something, but we know there are always those perceptions to manage within your community. So we think this can be a great option for some. And the reimbursement rates, to get to that business side of this. So as I said, all meals are reimbursed, you know, at the free rate or the highest rate without needing to take household income eligibility information, which is great, so that you know for as many meals as you serve, they're all going to be reimbursed at this level. And so for each lunch or supper, after school meal, through June 30th of this year, it is $3.16 per meal, plus USDA foods or cash in lieu of commodities at 23 cents. And then if you are serving snacks at some schools or in addition to a supper, that's 86 cents per snack. And again, any breakfasts that you may serve on weekends or holidays and whatnot are $1.71. And so we found with these reimbursement rates, school nutrition directors are, you know, typically able to cover all basic costs associated with the program, food, labor, and supplies. And many others find that this is a very beneficial program in also providing additional funds that can help to support overhead costs and kitchen equipment and additional funding for staff and things like that. But in exchange for this money, there are some basic record-keeping requirements, as we know, but they're fairly basic again. Most schools are very familiar with that record-keeping requirement, and a lot of times an electronic system that you're using for school breakfast and school lunch you're able to use for after-school meals. But there is an attendance requirement, which is a bit different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be tied to a specific enrichment activity, especially if you are having a broad overarching program with lots of activities going on. Some school nutrition directors and cafeteria managers like to kind of keep their own attendance rather than having that be delegated to after-school program staff if they are dealing with, you know, 10, 15 different activity coordinators in the school. But other than that, fairly self-explanatory. And so now we're going to get into the exciting part of how you can actually take this, you know, basic information about how the program works and really apply that to your district and your school and make it work. So the first part is just learning the basics, and I always recommend talking to your state agency since the program does work a little bit different in different states, especially with that initial application process. Learn the basic requirements. I have up there the At-Risk After School Meals Handbook, which is a much easier read than the program regulations, so that's a great place to start if you have any questions about the specifics of how things work. And then we always recommend contacting a successful district and learning from your peers, especially someone in the area who really knows what it's like to go through the process in your state. And again, we'll have our guest speaker, Carolyn Thomas, on later to help you learn from successful districts right here. All right, so assessing the need. So again, there's that basic area eligibility requirement that you have to meet, that each individual program site or school has to be within the attendance zone of another school where at least half of the kids are eligible for free or reduced price meals. But that does not mean that your district average has to be 50% or higher. And as you see here with this quote, even in kind of a middle need district where some of the schools are lower need, the program has still worked very successfully in the schools that are eligible. And so while, maybe intuitively higher need districts and higher need schools are likely to have greater demand for after school meals, that's not always the case, that schools with a lower percentage won't be successful. So schools that have a really robust after school program already, or principals and superintendents that are willing to help build that robust program can also get really large participation. Likewise, schools that have a really robust sports program and can build an after-school program and an after-school meals program around that often get very high participation. Just looking at whether or not snacks have already been successful in your schools and what the interest for that is can also help to get an idea of what the demand is going to be for meals. And so assess the interest and options. So again, it's really important to learn what's already going on in schools. And so figuring out if there are 21st Century Community Learning Center grantees either operating in the schools or being operated by the school, finding out what other extracurriculars and sports teams are already there in the building after school, and then also working with the schools to assess their interest in offering additional low barrier activities is really important. So even just having something like tutoring or study hall can be enough for you to be able to open up the meal program to all students and really promote something actively to all students as something they can do. So sometimes teacher contracts or unions may limit teachers' ability to stay after school for programming, but it's okay to rely on volunteers or outside organizations who may be able to come in and do that if the school or district is unable to. And then also just investigating transportation options and how students get to and from school is also important to know just what your inherent level of interest in the meal program might be. And so as we see here from a school nutrition director, working with programs that are already there can really help. And if you go with a coach or an activity leader who is already a champion, it can help you get your foot in the door and learn more about what's going on, and also get connected to other program leaders to build support for the program. All right, and then the internal factors. So these are all the things about your school nutrition department that can impact your ability to offer after-school meals and how you go about offering them. So the first and most basic one is your procurement and contract requirements. So if you work with a food service management company, obviously you'll need to make sure that was included in your contract, and if it wasn't, that you go through procurement in order to add the after-school meal to your contract. If you are a self-op district, then it's looking at your available kitchen equipment and storage capacity along with your current staff capacity to handle the program. So there are ways to get creative and work around any limitations that you have in terms of having more frequent deliveries to get over a lack of storage space, or creative menuing so that you can use a similar item for both lunch and supper but use it in a slightly different way, or on the flip side, to make sure that you're using different pieces of equipment and preparing very different things between lunch and supper so that you have that capacity with the equipment on a given day. And then the amount of staff time that you'll need can really vary all over the map. We found during the project that we did with the School Nutrition Foundation that some schools were making it work within existing staff time and weren't adding extra people at all. And then other schools were hiring completely new staff members. And this is all just a function of how many meals you're expecting to serve and the kinds of foods you're preparing for how labor intensive it is. But some basic things to just keep in mind always are minimum wage or base pay for food service staff, overtime pay if you are going the route of giving extra hours and paying overtime rather than hiring new staff. If you are hiring new staff or if you were making staff full-time, to consider the cost of benefits as well. And again, just assessing current staff bandwidth to handle additional work. All right, and convening stakeholders, very important. So while obviously there's some initial research that should probably be done before pitching this idea to stakeholders, it is very important to involve people early. And so as this school nutrition director saw, getting principal and the custodian and teachers and people staying after school are really important to have involved early on, just so that they're informed and they can be involved in developing standard operating procedures so that there's a lot of buy-in and that things work very smoothly. And determining sponsorship model. So it's a little complex. For those of you familiar with summer meals, this concept may be a little more familiar. But as a school district or school food authority, you can opt to only offer after-school meals at your own schools. Or you could also sponsor community sites. So you could go out and work with the Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA or other individual after-school programs throughout your community and also vend meals or provide meals to them and sponsor the program for them. You could decide on the flip side, if you don't want to handle the administration of the program and you really just want to prepare the meals and deal with the food service side, you could partner with a sponsor. So that would be a nonprofit organization that's approved by the state agency to administer the child and adult care food program and after-school meals. And so they would take care of the paperwork and you would just take care of the meals, and the schools would just be sites. And so they could work with just schools or they could work with schools and community-based programs as well. And then the simplest option would be to just serve as a vendor. So that means you're selling the meals for a fixed price to a sponsor to run the program. So whatever your level of capacity is, kind of on that administrative level, there's a way to make this work in a way that you can help to bring this program to more children. So if you have any questions kind of about what sponsorship means again and how that can work and how you can get connected to another sponsor if you feel like you can't take on that administrative side, please definitely don't hesitate to get in touch with me after this webinar to talk more about that. But then I also just want to highlight, kind of along with that idea of sponsorship, the idea of partnership. And this little infographic, which the text is a little messed up on it, just highlights the different kind of areas of core function for after-school meals. So obviously there's the food service side that we're talking about of preparing those meals and actually getting them to students. And there's also that enrichment component we talked about as a key requirement. In order to participate in after-school meals, there has to be some kind of educational enrichment program. Obviously, you have to have the location, the place where the kids are, and that has to be area eligible, and it has to meet health and safety requirements. And then there's that administrative side of who's going to fill out the application, who's going to make sure all the records are kept, who's going to file the claims, things like that. So that's a lot of different areas of expertise. And you don't necessarily have to be all of those, and finding partners to help with that can be a great way to extend your efforts. And then kind of some secondary aspects is just transportation, since obviously kids do have to get home, or if these are community-based programs, they have to get to that program and then home from that program. And then also promotion and letting kids and families know that this is available. So again, not a core function, but also very important to think about. But jumping back kind of to your side and those logistics, obviously you have to set your service model, and so a lot of that can just depend on what your setup is for breakfast and lunch, and whatever you do for that will oftentimes work for after-school meals, but it could be a good time to reconsider whether a different model or method would work better with after-school meals. So again, if you don't have a large number of meals throughout the district, perhaps preparing them at one school or in a central kitchen could be more efficient because it would use less staff time. You can also choose to do offer versus serve or serve complete meals. So as a school, you're welcome to do offer versus serve, especially since students are already familiar with it and can help to cut down on waste, although it may require a little bit more expertise for those distributing meals to be able to do that correctly. But then along with that, you can do unitized meals or a serving line. So again, unitized meals, very easy to distribute if you have a large crowd coming all at once after school, or if you're relying on after-school program staff to hand out meals. But a serving line could be great if you do want to offer more options or do offer versus serve. And again, you can choose between hot or cold meals or a combination of both. Again, people think supper and they may think big hot meal, but that's not required, again, with that super snack being an option. And I've talked to a lot of schools that do a mix, and especially on Fridays where they find that participation may be a little bit variable, that they'll do a cold meal on Friday, even if they're doing hot meals Monday through Thursday. And then the logistics. So I kind of already mentioned this, but thinking about delivery frequency and maybe needing to change that, thinking strategically about using equipment and storage space, thinking about the staffing model and number of hours needed. So again, are you serving all cold meals that aren't very labor intensive, or are you serving a full hot meal? How many hours are you going to need for that, depending? Thinking about meal distribution, is it going to be your staff that's doing that? Is it going to be after-school program staff? Is it volunteers? Again, that could be possible. And then thinking about your daily schedule and serving times. So I think, as Carolyn Thomas will mention at the end of the webinar, some schools have a long serving window to accommodate a lot of kids. Some serve meals right after the bell rings. Some serve meals later. So it really just depends on the activities and the people you're working with and what works for the kids. And then again, thinking about the logistics of record keeping, who's going to do it, how are they being held accountable, where are they going to put the records, all of those things like that are important to kind of work through when deciding on the model. And then this last piece of either rolling out slowly or piloting. And almost every school nutrition director I spoke to talked about the importance of starting slowly despite their excitement. One school rolled it out immediately, or one district rolled it out immediately at all the eligible schools within the district, and they were like, it was great, but it was also incredibly overwhelming. And if they'd been given a second chance, they might go a little bit more slowly and either just start with one school and add another every few weeks or a month. Or start with a small-scale pilot. And so especially if you're dealing with some pushback in your district, just calling it a pilot can often help. And it's like, oh, it's temporary. We're just going to give it a try, see how it works. But that also helps you to fine-tune it, work out any kinks with those logistics, and make sure that it is really successful when you open it up. All right, so along with making your program really successful, now we're going to switch gears and talk about innovative approaches and best practices. So, we started off looking at the program regulations and looking where there was areas of flexibility. And so we found, in looking through all the program guidance, that there is flexibility on when the meals are served. So the minimum requirement is it has to be after the final school bell in most situations, and it must occur during the regular hours of operation of your after-school program. But beyond that, there are no federal restrictions regarding meal time, order, or spacing in between meals. There's also flexibility in where the meals are served, so there's no requirement to be in the cafeteria. And although it is still a congregate meal requirement that kids do have to eat on site, they don't have to eat all together in one place. And you could have different groups eating in different locations throughout the campus. And there's also, again, that flexibility on who receives meals. So although you can't operate the after-school meals program for your sports teams exclusively, USDA has reiterated many times that athletes are more than welcome to take a meal as long as there is a broader enrichment program going on. And they've since also been very clear that as long as there are activities available and happening, there is no requirement for kids to actually participate in those activities. The school does not have to actually track attendance or participation in those activities. The activities just have to be there and available, and you have to track just attendance there after school period, but not necessarily for an activity. So with that, we developed some pilot testing to look at different successful practices, and again, have talked to a lot of successful districts. We kind of developed this model of taking your after-school meals program from good to great. Just the premise that no matter where you are, what your capacity is, what you're already doing or able to do, there's a step you could probably take to make your program better and reach even more children. So we'll go through all of these different tactics as we go. And so kind of our bronze medal tactics, so the simplest things that you could be doing for your program, are just encouraging all activity students to eat. We were surprised when we started this work on after-school meals that a lot of times the after-school meal was the best-kept secret at the school. And so maybe it started off just because one enrichment program asked for it, and so meals were being provided to just that group, but no one else knew about it. And so, we found schools get really great results just when the meal was actually promoted to activity leaders and they knew it was happening and they could tell their kids to go participate, and they built it into their daily schedule. And so coaches, along with activity leaders, are really great people to have on board and helping you out. So the next level tactics really revolve around making the program easy to access. So we did a test that we called the umbrella model, which really just involves opening the meal to all students. So it goes along with that guidance that I talked about, that as long as there are activities happening, you don't have to track actual participation in those activities. And so when we got schools to actually do this and open up the meal to all students because they had activities happening, we got these great results of a 53% increase in participation. So for the schools we worked at, that was about 35 extra kids per day, which may not sound like a lot, but for even just a Monday through Thursday program, that can add up to $17,000 per year in extra reimbursement. So you can think about what you can do with an extra $17,000 over the course of the year. And again, that's an extra 35 kids who might not have come for the meal because they didn't think they could or were allowed to. And those are probably most often the kids who need it. And so along with being able to do the umbrella model effectively and really make it as effective as it can be, we found that it's really great to have an administrative champion, so a superintendent or a principal. And that person can really help to address staff concerns. So sometimes there are concerns around having adequate supervision of kids and there being discipline issues if these kids aren't necessarily tied to an after-school activity. So the principal can come in and say that they're going to take responsibility for this. And I should note that in all of the testing that we did, that this was not actually a concern, and no one reported any discipline issues or increase in disciplinary actions after school. An administrative champion can also help to coordinate the effort among appropriate staff members, because again, you do need the custodial support for an extra meal service. There's coaches, there are activity leaders, there could be school-run programs, there can be outside programs coming into the school. So there can be a lot of moving pieces with this, and they can really help to coordinate a lot of that. And they also have the authority to make sure that the message is delivered to kids, since you may not always have access to all of the school social media channels or display boards and things like that, so they can help to really get the word out about that. And so along with that, promoting the program, when we did our largest pilot test on the umbrella model, we asked students how they heard about the meal, and the most popular response was the PA announcements. So just the morning or afternoon announcements letting students know that this meal was available and where they could find it after school was the single most effective thing that schools did. And it's so easy and cost-free, so we really encourage that to happen. But 53% said they also heard about it from a friend, so this peer advertising is really big too. And then almost as many said they heard about it from a teacher, coach, or other staff member. And since you have a little bit more ability to reach those teachers, coaches, and other staff members through staff meetings and other things like that, we really encourage you to get the word out to those people and work with them, since they have a huge influence over whether or not kids hear about this program, and then especially that they're actually able to access the program, since it does need to be built into their after-school hours. But some other options for promoting the program are just posting the after-school meal menu in the cafeteria or other places throughout the school or online so that kids know it's happening and they know it's going to be served and get excited for it. Posters or flyers throughout the school or cafeteria, digital display boards if you have those, making that information available on the school website and social media channels, especially if you're working with elementary schools and younger kids, making sure those parents know, so sending a letter home, and then likewise making announcements during open house or parent night so that everyone knows. So again, it can be very simple with that PA announcement or just staff meetings, but these additional channels can just get the word out to even more kids and help them to remember that it's there and how they can get there and make them excited for the meal. So another success factor that we saw was serving the meal right after the bell. And so this, again, may not work for every school, just depending on how things work. But because a lot of kids are going home, pretty much immediately after school, and they may not have the ability to stay for a long time, or they may not want to stay for a long time, serving that meal as soon as the bell rings really helps you to reach as many kids as possible. And then our gold medal tactics, our highest level tactics, just involve a lot of different ideas on making the program even more accessible and appealing to kids. So service alternatives, revolve around the idea that kids need multiple ways and options and times to be able to get a meal. And so when we asked students why they didn't try a meal during our pilot test, 44 said they had other things to do after school. So again, these kids are busy. They have things they need to get to. So having more than one serving line can help you to serve a large number of kids very quickly, so that's important. Having a non-traditional point of service, so especially if your cafeteria isn't very accessible or if it's in the basement or in the back of the school, bringing that meal out into a place that's very well trafficked after school can really help. And then direct delivery to large activities. So if you know that the band and the football team are going to be like 50 to 100 kids all eating, you don't need to have them taking up valuable space in the main line in the cafeteria. You can just get those meals directly out to them and they can get on with their activity. And if possible, allow the meal to be transported. So again, the meal does need to stay on campus. It cannot go home or go on the bus without state agency approval for field trips and whatnot. But again, kids are busy and they're going to their activities after school and they may not necessarily have time to sit down in the cafeteria to eat it. So letting them take that meal to their activities can be very helpful. And then, if you're able to, supper in the classroom is a very effective way of delivering the meal and making it extremely convenient because the meal comes to them. So we piloted supper in the classroom in elementary schools, just kind of based on the idea that they probably don't have as many different activities happening after school. They're probably most likely to kind of go with the flow of a supper in the classroom. And we found it to be hugely successful. 80% of all students ate supper when there was supper in the classroom, and they had more kids eating supper than were eating lunch. So this is really a great way if you know you have a high-need community, and especially if you know that a lot of kids are going to be leaving soon after the bell rings, to make this available to them in as easy a way as possible. So some lessons learned from that pilot test, though, I think are important to share here. Communicating with teachers is huge. We have a whole report with some more suggestions on how to do that effectively in terms of just letting them know the need and how this helps. Consider scheduling, bus timing, and logistics is very important. We have a lot of best practices around breakfast in the classroom in terms of just how to serve and how to deliver the meals and what kinds of foods work well, so we encourage you to use those. You can get creative with space and equipment, since again, you're going to be serving a lot of meals if you're going to reach 80% of all of your students. You can seek grant funding for startup costs, especially if you don't have anything like carts and insulated carrier bags for breakfast in the classroom. You can brand it as a super snack. Again, it can be a smaller meal, faster and easier to eat. Can also help with any perceptions of, overeating and feeding everyone this extra meal. And you can also try share tables or using offer versus serve, even for supper in the classroom, to cut down on food waste or perceptions of overeating. And so as this food service director who tried supper in the classroom said, it was really important to show teachers what the need are, and they don't always appreciate that that need is there. But once they do, then they can be very supportive of supper in the classroom and helping kids get that needed meal. And so another success factor that kind of goes along with supper in the classroom is thinking about transportation. So this is a barrier for many kids if they can't stay after school. But you can look at adjusting bus schedules, especially if you have some schools in your district that aren't eligible for after-school meals. Maybe their buses can come earlier, and the schools that are eligible, their buses can come later after the kids have time to eat and maybe do a quick activity or just have the option for that tutoring and whatnot. Even some schools have found that optimizing the logistics of loading kids on buses can be enough to provide time for an after-school meal. If you do have more activities happening, if you are, again, maybe adding more things like tutoring and study hall, you can add later activity buses or adjust the final bell time is an option. So again, you could either make your school extended day and you could then serve a meal during the regular school day if you qualify as extended day, or if you are above your minimum instructional time but not quite long enough to be extended day, then you could move your bell earlier and kind of make time for that meal before students would ordinarily go home. And then improving the variety, choice, and quality of the meal. So obviously kids are consumers. They have a choice, especially after school. Some of them could choose to just go home or go to a convenience store on their way. So making sure that that food is appealing and tastes good, and ideally if they have some options or participate in the meal in some way can really help. And so along with that, with kids said that they took the after-school meal because the food looked good, I'll say along the lines of that, school nutrition directors found it was really successful to have containers with clear lids or to use clear bags or even just to have trays because they found that kids, walking around with their after-school meal and kind of showcasing what was in it actually did help to build interest and get more students participating just by literally seeing what was being offered that day. All right, so that is it for me, and now I am very excited to introduce to you Carolyn Thomas. I know it's confusing. We have two Carolyn speaking today, but bear with us. So Carolyn is the food nutrition consultant for the Macomb Intermediate School District in Michigan, where she provides training and support to the food nutrition department in school districts in Macomb and St. Clair counties. And she also oversees the school meals program for 7 schools serving the special needs population of the county. She has an MBA from the University of Detroit Mercy and an undergraduate degree in management from Xavier University. She developed her passion and commitment to child nutrition as the nutrition director for several local districts and as a consultant, and she has nearly 3 decades of experience. And on top of that, she is active in several school nutrition organizations. She is the Professional Development Chair for the School Nutrition Association of Michigan. She is also an instructor in the statewide training program and leadership academy for the School Nutrition Association of Michigan. So she brings with her a wealth of experience, and we are very excited to have her today. So Carolyn,
thank you very much, Carolyn. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that the webinar has been informative and enjoyable so far. As Carolyn said, I'm the child nutrition consultant for 21 school districts here in Macomb County, as well as 9 school districts in St. Clair County. And I've also helped quite a few other districts get off the ground with their after-school supper program. So today, though, I would like to specifically speak to you about 3 very successful dinner programs that we have currently running in Macomb and St. Clair counties. I'd like to talk to you about the Mount Clemens Community Schools, the Warren Consolidated Schools, and the Port Huron Area School District. So you can see we are from Southeast Michigan. Macomb and St. Clair counties are just to the north and east of Detroit, and we are actually situated right on Anchor Bay, the St. Clair River, and one of the Great Lakes, Lake Huron. So first off, I'd like to talk to you about Mount Clemens Community Schools. And as I talk to you, you're going to be seeing actual pictures from the various school districts' dinner programs. So this is a picture of Mount Clemens Schools. They are a district that currently uses the community eligibility provision for their entire district. But prior to becoming community eligible, they had a free and reduced percentage of nearly 90% for their 2000 student enrollment. Now, they saw the need for dinner when students were staying after school for enrichment programs in their high school and their largest elementary, which is called Seminole. So they opened the supper program simultaneously in October 2014 in both buildings. They run Monday through Friday from 3:30 to 4:45 at their elementary school, and they run Monday through Thursday from 2:30 to 3:30, as Carolyn said, right after the bell at the high school. They serve approximately 125 meals daily at both schools. The lunch staff stays on for dinner. They have a model in their district where they bring in their latest staff member to assist with lunch, and then they just stay on for dinner. They have 2 people that work the dinner program in both buildings, one to count the meals and one to serve the meals. They do offer an awful lot of fresh fruits and vegetables because the students are very used to seeing that during the school day, but they also offer a boxed meal for their athletic programs at the high school. So they have their elementary dinner menu that they showcase separately from their regular menu, and they also have their secondary dinner menu that they showcase separately from their regular breakfast and lunch menu. And it's been very successful for them to delineate that it is a separate program, especially for the parents. And so the next district is the Warren Consolidated School District. And Warren Consolidated Schools is a very large urban school district on the south side of Macomb County. It has an enrollment of nearly 19,000 students. They actually don't qualify for the after-school dinner program in all of their schools. As a matter of fact, they qualify for it in less than half, but they have started their program small, but they certainly recognized the hunger in their high school students staying after for their enrichment programs. So they're opening slowly, but they opened their first program at Mott High School in the spring of 2015, and that was so successful that the following year they opened at Sterling High School. So because they're at high schools, they do have seasonal average daily participation. The seasonality occurs much higher in the fall when they have more athletic programs, but they really noticed that they needed to do this. So they actually opened up the supper program to their entire student body right off the get-go. So they have a very different staffing model, but it works extremely well for them. They employ one staff person at each high school to not start until noon, and they actually stay till 7 o'clock. And their primary duties are to help finish off the day for lunch service and preparation. Then they do some additional prep work for the following day, primarily for the breakfast program, and then they get to work and they handle the entire dinner program. They have their attendance sign-in sheet directly in the cafeteria because they are open in both buildings for 3.5 hours. So they have chosen to serve from 2:30 when school lets out until 6 p.m. to capture those students that may have to go immediately into drama or into cheerleading or into their athletic practice, and then they come at the end, whereas other programs allow them to go to dinner first and then they go off to their various activities. So they average approximately 175 meals daily between the 2 buildings, but when they have seasonal highs in the fall, they are actually serving an additional 150 meals. And the picture you're looking at is taken from both high schools, where they offer a wide variety of dinner items Sometimes it's left over from lunch, other times it's prepared right for dinner, but they always have at least 2 hot choices and a hot vegetable as well as many fresh fruits and seasonal vegetables from Michigan, because we are a very large agricultural state. So the next district I'd like to talk to you about is the Port Huron area schools. Port Huron is located on the east side of St. Clair County, and it has an enrollment of about 10,000 students. They also participate in the community eligibility provision in all of their schools and have done so since 2014. Their overall free and reduced percentage is approximately 75%. They saw the need in many of their buildings where children were hanging around at the end of the day looking for things that they could take home with them. And so they made the decision to offer the supper program in their neediest school buildings. So they currently operate in 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 1 of their high schools. They currently serve about 50 meals per building per day. However, they've made the decision to open up to the entire student body in all 10 of these buildings beginning next school year, because they are seeing a need. And additionally, they are operating currently with 2 different models. They operate the supper program, but some of the kids that aren't accessing the supper program currently are getting after-school snacks. So that's going to discontinue, and they're going to open up the dinner program to everyone. One of the best practices that Port Huron has brought to their after-school dinner program is they have utilized their collaborative partners to bring best practices to their elementary supper programs in particular. For example, they have Michigan State Extension on Tuesdays and Thursdays come and do educational activities with their children prior to their supper service. And the pictures you're looking at were actually from Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras, and the other pictures were from their Fun Fitness Day, and that's where high school students from the Port Huron area high schools come and exercise with the students for a half an hour, and then supper is served. So additionally, I'd just like to say it's really important, as Carolyn mentioned, to have buy-in from your key stakeholders at the building. I can't stress enough that without that, as much as you do to plan, prepare, forecast, promote, without those key stakeholders buy-in, it just won't be as successful. So as Carolyn mentioned, the principal, the custodial staff, your school nutrition staff, the enrichment program staff, they all have to have buy-in. And the biggest #1 successful component that we have found prior to starting the program was to market, and raise awareness that students have this opportunity. Back to school nights have been particularly successful. And one other thing that we didn't mention prior to this is, and we only did this past year, but we went out to some farmers markets in the area, and we had flyers that the dinner program was starting in some of the buildings. So we think that that may have raised awareness with some parents and family. Siblings can come and have meals. So several of our districts have found that if the parent is picking up the child after school and the meal service program is still open, siblings are eligible to eat there as well. So they've just leveraged a lot of ways to make their programs successful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
I think everyone learned a lot from all of the variety of schools that you've been able to work with. So we are going to be transitioning into Q&A shortly. So we already have some questions rolling in, which is great. But if you haven't submitted that question in the back of your mind, you can start typing it in now while I just quickly review some resources that we have available on our website. So again, I already mentioned this at the beginning, but 3 meals a day, a win-win-win, is a really great startup guide that goes through some of the things that we talked about today in a little bit more depth. So we have an executive summary that's really just some quick steps and thought starters, and then we have a full report that includes a lot more information from school nutrition directors that we interviewed. We also have more information on the umbrella model that I mentioned. So we have a full report that talks about our pilot study. But if you really just want to look at implementing it or talking to maybe a principal or superintendent or a school about it, we have a nice handout there on the left. We also similarly have a report and a handout on implementing supper in the classroom, and so you can learn more about how to make that successful and implement that in your schools. And then we have a brand new report about schools as nutrition hubs. So this was another partnership with the School Nutrition Foundation, working with some really successful school nutrition directors. So this actually looks at all of the child nutrition programs, from breakfast, after-school meals, and summer meals, and really looking at the business case for doing all of these child nutrition programs and doing them well and expanding them as much as possible. So this is a really exciting new report, and there's also going to be another webinar on this next Wednesday. It's sponsored by the School Nutrition Association. So if you didn't get enough today, you can do more next week. And so all of these resources are available on our website, bestpractices.nokidhungry.org/afterschool. So a lot of the resources and tools are there on the right under resources. If you're interested in more webinars and other events, there's that events link up at the top. And if you want to get our newsletter and keep in touch to learn more about resources as they come out, you can click subscribe up there at the top of the page. And so with that, we will go into questions. And so Stephanie is going to help me by reading all of these great questions as they've been coming in.
Okay, great. First question we have from Mark. Having to maintain an additional electronic system concerns me slightly. Can you share what sort of system this would be and the information required? Would it work to use a Google Doc?
Great, thank you so much for this question, Mark. I think I might have been a little less than clear when I talked about that. There is no requirement to use an electronic system. It is just an option. And so for many schools that already have an electronic system, it works well. But if you do not have an electronic system, or if maybe you don't have access to it after school hours, you do not need to use it. So you can go old school and do paper-based sign-in sheets or rosters. You can do, tick off sheets for the meals. And so you do not need to rely on an electronic system if that's not what you want to do. But in all situations, it's really great to just talk with your state agency through your initial application process and beyond, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page with the system and feels comfortable that it is going to be accountable, efficient, and meet the requirements of the program.
A question from Susan. For sites that receive meals and snacks, is there a requirement for amount of time between meal and snack service?
That's another great question, and there is no federal, time restrictions. However, some states may have guidelines or policies on that. So again, it's good to check with your state agency either before adding a snack or changing any of your snack or meal times. So again, there shouldn't be a problem. Obviously, they might ask some questions if you're going to end your supper service at 4 p.m. and start your snack service at 4:01. But in general, there isn't a requirement to space them out any particular way.
Okay. Marty has asked, can kids take food home with them, or do they have to eat it on site? I'm wondering how this works when a meal is served right after the bell.
Yeah, that is a great question. And again, this is a congregate meal program, so the meals do need to be consumed on site. And so there are a lot of different ways to make this work. I mean, the meal could be served in the cafeteria right after the bell. So it isn't to say that, kids are taking a meal on, their way onto the bus or anything like that. It's, again, just making it as efficient as possible for kids who do need to get to an activity or they do need to go catch a bus. Even if you are in more of a central location, if it's like a big commons area or a multi-purpose room or a library, you know, ideally there's a place that kids could sit and hang out and eat there. And then with a lot of schools, it's just educating students, you know, reminding them as they take a meal that, you know, they need to eat it before they leave. So this is another area, and keep harping on this, where working with your state agency is really important. Some state agencies feel very strongly about the accountability aspect and making sure students stay on site. Other schools, you know, as long as you're telling students to stay on site and, you know, taking measures to give them a place to eat and whatnot, you know, tend to be pretty happy with that. So a great relationship with your state agency will ease a lot of those concerns, and just letting them know that you really are trying to run the program with integrity and accountability, and that you're willing to find a good system that will work for everyone while still making this meal accessible.
Okay. Another question. Some school officials have opened up their meal program to the entire school, but their participation remains the same. What can I say to encourage them that following the umbrella model will allow more students to take part in the at-risk after-school meals program?
That's a great question. And so I think, as Carolyn mentioned when she was speaking, that promotion and marketing and letting parents know about the meal are really important. Just school leaders and officials knowing that the meal is open to everyone is not necessarily going to translate into kids automatically. So again, going back to those methods of promotion, keeping it up too, especially if it's been after a break or it's a new school year, to let everyone know that that meal is available. And again, making sure that that word is getting out to parents as well is really important. Carolyn, would you like to add something on that one too?
Yes, thank you. I would say that in addition to what Carolyn said, one of the things that we found extremely helpful was, before we started the program, was to make sure, number one, that the parents knew about it, but additionally that every staff member who was going to be in the building after school knew about it as well, and had the menu, and had the service times, and had the contact information of the person who was actually going to be in the building serving the meals. And so if there were any questions at all, they could come down and have that conversation. And just raising the awareness that everyone in the building knew about it, from, you know, from every custodian to every athletic coach to drama to band at the secondary levels, because it is very difficult sometimes to really understand who is in the building after school. But if you can locate those people and congregate them to have a staff meeting or just a very simple after-school meeting one day, it really does help to bring awareness to the program.
Okay, great, Carolyn. Carolyn, I actually have a question for you as well. Do the schools manage everything from meals to enrichment, or do they partner with anyone else to help run the program?
That's a great question, and there's more than one model to use to set up your particular operation. For example, in the examples that I gave you, 2 of the districts do everything. They have the service model where the children come into the cafeteria and that's how they get their attendance. But we also have another model that I did not discuss, where we have a district that actually provides the meals, but the after-school enrichment program itself is responsible for doing the meal counts and making sure that their children come down to the cafeteria where the food service staff member is. We also have another model that I've worked with where aftercare in an elementary school is primarily responsible for doing the record keeping on the daily basis and then turning it into food service, making sure they do their check-off sheets and count-off sheets. So you can really do a wide variety of options, and even within one building, if you have certain programs that eat in the classroom, where certain other programs may come down to your cafeteria. Within one building, you might have a multi-purpose model.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, one last question, and I should say that Carolyn Waite will follow up with other questions that we are unable to get to at this point. But the last question is, what is the application process like?
That's a great one and a good one to end on so that you can think about getting started after this webinar ends. But it really does vary by state. For some states, it's just a simple add-on to your school meals application. In other states, it is a separate process. But again, contacting your state agency is a great first step because they can tell you about what that first step is and what the process looks like. But Carolyn, do you want to talk about what it looks like in Michigan or what your experience with it is?
Sure. In Michigan, the application process is separate from the school breakfast and school lunch application, and you need to fill it out on an annual basis just like you do for the school meals program. And it is a little bit lengthier, but it is not difficult, and once you have all the information you need, it's just a matter of plug and play into the next year for your after-school meals program.
Great, thank you. All right, so again, if you've asked another question we weren't able to get to, we will follow up with you after the webinar, or if you have any additional questions that you think of later, you are more than welcome to contact me. My contact information is up there. And so again, we're going to send a link to the evaluation right after this webinar, and if you do want that CEU certificate for continuing education credit, you'll need to complete the evaluation. So please be on the lookout for that, and thank you again for tuning in today. We really appreciate your participation. And thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.